Hello my friends and welcome back to the classroom. And what classroom wouldn't be complete without some algebra, some equations. So the previous classroom video was, I got a lot of positive comments on it. Maybe not the greatest viewership, but a lot of positive comments, and so I decided that I would do at least one more. And so today we're going to be covering a really important lesson, especially for multiplayer strategists, and that is timings theory. Now, if you have ever watched a strategy game, esport being played, you'll probably hear people talk about timings, but often they only talk about the most basic part of the theory and not the whole theory. So when they talk about timings, they're often talking about some moment in the game where you can possibly have something. But anyway, we'll go into the details of it now. So the equation which you need to learn is time plus possibility plus enemy knowledge equals enemy strategy. And this is actually, I'll just decrease the size a little bit. This is actually a solvable equation, believe it or not. Now, the bit that most esports commentators talk about is time and possibility. So there is a second sub-equation, if you will, which is that time equals possibility. And we'll discuss this one first. This sounds complicated, but this first bit is actually quite easy. So time equals possibility is this idea that as the game progresses, the equally possibilities progress as well. So, for example, I'll put together a simple strategy game here. So in my simple strategy game, we have a command center which costs 400 minerals and generates 400 minerals a minute. And then we have a supply depot that costs 100 minerals and takes a minute to build and gives you the 1 unit that you're allowed to have. And we have a barracks which also costs 100 minerals and takes 1 minute to make. And then we have a wide variety of infantry units, but we'll just go with one for now, just to make life easy. I keep cutting instead of just copying like a fool. There we go. Okay. Now every unit is going to cost 100 minerals and take a minute to make, to keep things simple. So I'll even put that there as well, just to make this simple. $100 minerals, 100 mins, 1 minute. Okay. So this is my simple strategy game. It's got 4 buildings in it. That's it. So what we are saying with this is we're saying, imagine if the game is 3 minutes long. What can the player possibly do in that time? Well, in 3 minutes, you would have 300 minerals, obviously. Which means that the most you can have is exactly what you see here. Your command center, a supply depot, a barracks, and 1 conscript. Now you may say, but Edmon, what if the person just didn't build anything? What if they built a supply depot and 2 barracks? What if they built 2 supply depots and 1 barracks? So the point about possibility is, in 3 minutes of time, there seems like there's a lot of possibilities, but you don't have to concern yourself or ever think about non-optimal possibility. So the only possibility for a good player, if the game lasts exactly 3 minutes, then a good player will build exactly this. They will have their command center because they started with it. 3 minutes have passed. So they'll build a supply depot, then a barracks, then a conscript. Because that's all they can do. That is how they most optimize their power. Now, possibility, because it equals time, as time increases, possibility also increases. The two are correlated. So, at the 4-minute mark, there now distinctly becomes two possibilities. The first possibility is this, and someone's holding on to 100 minerals. So, plus 100 minerals. Because they need a supply depot to build another unit. But building the supply depot on its own doesn't necessarily do anything for them. So they may be tempted to hold on to this 100 minerals, they may be tempted to turn it into a supply depot, they may be tempted to turn it into another barracks, whatever. But the point is that at this moment, an extra minute passes, this strategy does not improve in any way. And there's no other strategy that's better. So at the 4-minute mark, this is the most you can possibly have to worry about. However, there is a second possibility now. And that second possibility is simply that the player builds 2 command centers. Now, most games are like this in that they have this idea that there is an economic path to your build order and there is a war path, if you will, where you are building units immediately and you have to balance between those two things based on what your opponent is doing. But in this simple strategy game, we have only these two possibilities at the 4-minute mark. Because there's nothing else that makes sense. Everything else would be lesser than these two. So at the 5-minute mark, then what happens is, well, at the 5-minute mark, we probably see on this path someone then pick up another supply depot and another conscript, because that most enhances their position on the board. And this person will have to, at the moment, they'll hold on to their minerals because they can't do anything with them. Or they will start building what they know they have to build. If they're not going to build another command center, then they're going to start building their first supply depot. So at the moment, only these possibilities exist at this point in time, the 5-minute mark. Now, there is a little bit more to time equals possibility, and that is that you can apply it to deny possibility as well. So, for example, we might have in the game this nuclear missile silo. We know that we don't have to deal with the nuclear missile silo because it can't possibly exist in the game state at this time. And depending on how we structure dependencies, this thing could not possibly exist until at least 10 minutes. Even in the case of let's say that you could just build it straight away without any prerequisites. In this position, the fastest you could get the nuclear missile silo is at the 10-minute mark, having built nothing. And from this position, obviously at the 4-minute mark, you've got your second command center. So then you've got at the 5-minute mark, you've got 200. At the 6-minute mark, 400. At the 7-minute mark, 600. At the 8-minute mark, 800. This is hard. And at the 9-minute mark, 1,000. So in theory, this setup could produce the nuclear missile silo at the 9-minute mark, which means that the timing. This is what esports casters often refer to. I've just noticed here that my nuclear missile silo is hidden. It costs 1,000 minerals. Let me just move this up here. The timing for the nuclear missile silo is 9 minutes. And you say, well, how come the timing is 9 minutes? On this path, it's 10 minutes. But it's 9 minutes on this path. But if you're on this path, the timing is 10 minutes. The timing of something is always, when esports casters say that something has a particular timing, It's the fastest you can possibly get something with the most optimal strategy. So the timing for a nuclear missile silo is 9 minutes. And before that time, you don't have to worry about it as a possibility, because it isn't a possibility. And so, time equals possibility, and if time is not great enough, then certain possibilities don't exist. That's the simple part of the equation. I hope that makes sense to everybody, because that's the most basic building block, and that is what people mostly understand. Now, the next bit is enemy knowledge equals enemy strategy. So, if I have, let's get rid of these. Let's go with a completely different example. If I have a game state where this person has built a war factory and let's say 2 supply depots, this is the 8-minute game state. And let's go with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So this is the game state. Is the game has been going on for 8 minutes, and in those 8 minutes, I see 3 tanks. This is what I see. Only this. Oh, it's not going to let me. It's not going to let me just cut and paste it. Okay. So this, just this, is my enemy knowledge. And obviously I have time, because I know how long the game's been going on for, so time equals 8 minutes. Now, I can solve the enemy strategy, which is everything about them, what they're doing. I can solve the enemy strategy because I have time, possibility, and enemy knowledge. So if I see 3 tanks at 8 minutes, I know that they've built a war factory without seeing it. Of course they have. They've built tanks. So they must have a war factory. And they must have 3 supply depots, because otherwise they can't support those tanks. And since the game's been going on for 8 minutes, I know that they must have this setup plus 100 minerals. Oh, not minutes, minerals. I know, just based on looking at their army of 3 tanks, I know everything about their base. I know they've got a war factory. I know they've got supply depots. I know they've got a command center. What I know that they don't have is 2 command centers. They could not have possibly built 2 command centers and produced this in time. Because if they built 2 command centers, they would not have enough money in 8 minutes to produce to produce 3 tanks. So if you had 2 command centers, so the first one's coming at the 4th minute, and then in the remaining 4 minutes you will receive 800 minerals. So then you will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 100 minerals. It is actually possible under this for the enemy to have 2 command centers and to have built all this, because of the way in this simple game that this doubles. But interestingly, in either possibility, I still know the rest of what they've done. It's just that the timings of their tanks are different. Well, of course, it does depend on when you spotted these. If you spotted these in the 7th minute, then the 2 command center thing is not possible. So let's say, for argument's sake, that we spot this at the 7th minute. So if we spot this at the 7th minute, then we know for certain that they haven't got a second command center, because it's impossible. They can't produce 3 tanks in 7 minutes and have that second command center. Only at the 8th minute does the possibility of a 2 command center build become possible. And so a lot of players use this timings theory in much more complicated games to solve what the enemy strategy is. Now, let's say that we saw this at the 7th minute mark. Now it's 9 minutes. So, it's 9 minutes, there's 200 minerals that's not accounted for. We know that they didn't go 2 command center because we saw 3 tanks at the 7th minute. So that rules out the possibility of 2 command centers. What could they do with those 200 minerals? What makes sense? Well, they could add another supply depot and another tank at this point. But we're spying on their army, say. We can see their army, but not their base. We haven't seen a 4th tank. So, if we haven't seen a 4th tank, you have to say to yourself, well, why haven't we seen a 4th tank? Surely the next move is to make another supply depot and another tank. And indeed, if you see at the 9th minute a 4th tank appearing, then you know that that's what they've done. But if you don't see that, you have to think to yourself, well, what makes sense? What could they buy for 200 minerals that makes sense? Now, they could, of course, buy a barracks. They could be preparing, basically, they could be preparing to get something else. So, in order to prepare to get something else, they would obviously build a barracks, or, in this game we'll expand to having an airfield. One of these two, plus a supply depot. Now we know, of course they could be saving up for a command center, but at the 9th minute mark, we're going to presume that the possibility is that they've built another supply depot and one of these 2 buildings. Because if they're going to build another tank, we'd see the tank, but we don't see the tank. So, and this, we're going to presume that you have full sight of their army at all times, so they're not hiding the other tank somewhere to try and trick you. That gets into the theory of mind games, which is a very different, another topic entirely. So we're going to presume that you've got perfect knowledge of their army, but not their base. So you haven't seen this. It's 9 minutes. You haven't seen the 4th tank. So they must build a supply depot and some other building, because in the 10th minute, when the 10th minute arrives, they're going to buy something different. If they were going to buy tanks, they just would have carried on buying tanks. Now you, as the player, you take your enemy knowledge, possibility and time, and you say, well, at the 9th minute, they could have something from the barracks or something for the airfield, from the airfield. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is probably that they got the airfield. And the reason why is based on an understanding of the units. So typically in a simple strategy game, tanks beat infantry. And infantry, weirdly, tend to beat aircraft with being able to hide in all kinds of nooks and crannies with man pads and stingers and stuff. Aircraft find it difficult to target infantry, usually in strategy games. But aircraft usually devour tanks. So the tank player is not concerned, once again, presuming that your opponent is actually good and understands what they're doing and knows what they're doing, your opponent is not going to build a barracks in preparation for adding infantry, potentially, unless what they want is anti-aircraft infantry, because their tanks are vulnerable. And likewise, your opponent may not be concerned with the airfield unless it offers some kind of anti-air option. Those are the possibilities that you have to think about. Because why would you concern yourself with anything? They're not going to build, for example, attack dogs. They're not going to build anti-infantry tank. Not an anti-infantry tank, wrong thing to say. They're not going to build an anti-tank gun, for example. Why wouldn't they build an anti-tank gun? That's a good example. The reason why is because they've got tanks, right? And so tanks are, like in the game of rock, paper and scissors, tanks are the rock. And the anti-tank gun is good against rock, but you have rock. So a good player says, well, my rock will beat the enemy rock because I'll control my rock better than they'll control their rock. So they don't need anti-tank. Tanks are not a possibility. If the other guy has made tanks, then the goal will be to out-micro, to outplay the other player with the same assets. And they don't need an anti-tank gun because tanks are not a threat to a group of tanks. It's simply a mirror situation where the best player with the best control is going to win. So what the tank player wants to be doing at the 9th minute, since they've not built more tanks, they're obviously considering something else. What they want is an anti-aircraft thing, most likely, because they know that the tanks can't shoot aircraft, and the aircraft are a possibility in the game since there's an airfield. So therefore, the enemy strategy, as solved by you in your head, is almost certainly that they are building anti-aircraft of some description. And that is, and this is me really trying to simplify what can be an incredibly complicated topic, requiring a lot of layers of understanding, but this is timings theory. It's the idea that you know how long the game has been going on for, you know what the possibilities are and how those possibilities unfold over time. So you have those two parts. And so by gathering knowledge of the enemy, you can therefore take those three things and solve what the enemy's strategy is. And sometimes it really genuinely doesn't require much enemy knowledge to completely solve the enemy's strategy. You can rearrange this equation as well. Like, for example, if you were to show an extremely skilled strategy game player two positions in a game where the players had not engaged yet, but two positions in the game where the players had built whatever it was that they decided to build, a very skilled player could, since they can see the enemy's strategy and thus have full knowledge of the enemy, and they know the possibilities of the game, they could tell you how long that game has been going on for without seeing the clock, because this is actually solvable in that way. Now, this is a skill that is so important for multiplayer strategists. It is a lot of one of the most common accusations that you will ever hear when you play multiplayer strategy games is that you're a map hacker. But it's actually an intense, deep understanding of timings theory that enables players to work out exactly what you're doing and what you have done simply based on some pieces of knowledge, be it what units you've produced, some small portion of your base being revealed, etc. That basically allows them to know exactly what you're doing by cross-referencing what you have with how long the game has gone on for and what the possibilities are. This always presumes that your enemy is a perfect player who plays the exact most optimal strategies. But that may seem like a wrong thing to think about, but at the end of the day, you always want to consider your opponent to be as good as they can possibly be. If your strategy revolves around the other player being bad, then it's a bad strategy. So we only consider the possibilities that make sense, that are most optimal. We never consider any possibilities that are erroneous, because why bother? Worry about the most optimal and therefore the most dangerous strategies, and if you can beat those, you can beat all the other stuff. Okay, that's it for timings theory. I know this is complicated, so if you have any questions, pop them down below, and who knows, if these videos do well, maybe get 1,000 views or something, a couple of thousand views, I'll do some more. We might go into mind game theory or some other strategy theories. These videos take a fair bit of time to plan out, so I hope you enjoyed this classroom, and hopefully I will see you again.